Hello and welcome to this recording of the Family Business Central 101 webinar. This webinar has a long history. We've been running it for probably 7 years in slightly different versions. It started off actually as a big breakfast session in New Zealand and got such a good reception that we've turned it into a webinar, particularly during the pandemic, so that people could get a really good understanding of what are the key things that a family business needs to be thinking about, what are the key issues that they need to get their head around if they want to manage succession well, if they want to build a family legacy or a family business legacy, and at a broad level, what are the key issues that they need to look at. So we hope you enjoy this. Obviously, there's a lot of material. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to get in touch either via the website or via my email, which is philip@familybusinesscentral.com, and be delighted to talk to you about what it is that family businesses need to do. So, and the subheading there is Love and Money Are a Potent Brew. And the reality is that if you're running a family business, you are combining two of the most important things in the world to you: your family and your business, your livelihood, your income. And this can be, when it's done well, amazing. And equally, it can be disastrous. And we've worked with both. Recently, we've worked with a family where we had 16 people in the room: the grandmother, her 3 children, their spouses, 8 grandchildren ranging in age from 15 to 30. And it was an extraordinary experience. We had about 4 or 5 days together in a room, separated by a month, just working through all the key issues. And it was an amazing experience. Equally, we've had situations where families, the relationships have got to a point where, literally in one case, family members aren't talking to one another. And they are what we call breaking the Christmas dinner rule, in terms of the arguments and the fights have got to such a level that they can't sit down at the end of the year and have a meal, right? And celebrate, what has been going on for the year. So that's the one to avoid. And in fact, it's not that difficult to avoid, but probably the key thing is start early. So let me talk you through, some of the points that we think are really important here. Now, this webinar is actually focused on Australia and New Zealand. Interestingly, we've been doing some research into the UK and also into Saudi Arabia, and the stats are exactly the same, if not even more impressive, in terms of the size of or the impact on the economy of family businesses. For Australia and New Zealand, it's very hard to actually get accurate numbers because, in fact, it's not recognized, right? We believe that family business is, in fact, the engine room of both countries, but it's unrecognized. We've met with senior politicians and they just don't even know it even exists. And yet it provides an enormous level of employment for people in both countries. We know from things like the Edelman Trust Barometer that both people prefer to buy from family businesses, they trust them more, as well as people prefer to work for family businesses because they manage people more effectively. So this is a really important part of the economy. It is, we believe, the seedbed of innovation and entrepreneurialism. Often when we work with different family businesses, we start seeing what they're doing, and whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in farming, whether that is in tourism, they are innovating like crazy. They're often the leaders, and they find niches that other people haven't found before. And it's extraordinary, right? And the creativity, the hard work, the entrepreneurialism is remarkable. And you combine that with their longevity. These are really significant and important businesses. As I said earlier, government doesn't really actually even know about family business. In Australia, there is, in fact, the Small and Family Business Ombudsman, which is a great start. New Zealand is yet to get onto that level. And there's not much in other governments. We don't know anything much in the US. The UK, it's barely recognized, barely known about. And that's the same for a lot of countries. And our job is actually to start changing that. We also know, and as I said earlier, they survive longer. They have a long-term frame. When we work with families, we have a 40-year viewing. So we're looking, and we actually say to them, we're thinking 40 years ahead. And, for a number of them, they get pretty startled by that. But actually, that's how we do look at it. And most family businesses, we know one that has a 200-year plan. We've got another one that has a 100-year plan. Normal businesses don't think that long. And this is partly what allows them to survive. Their debt equity ratios are usually much lower. They're very entrepreneurial, but they manage risk very well. So they punch way above their weight in these areas. And we've seen this, particularly during the pandemic. We've worked with a number of very significant tourism industry businesses. It's been hard. There's absolutely no doubt about that, but they will all survive. And so they've got mechanisms and ways of dealing with this. They're able to move very quickly, make decisions, deal with the tough decisions that they've had to make, and move on. So they're an impressive group. Now, this is a question that we ask all the time because it's often these statistics aren't really known. And really what we're talking about is succession here in terms of what percentage of family businesses make it from the first to second, second to third, and third to fourth, right? Now, to be brutally frank, we're relying on stats that have been around for a long time. And anybody who knows family business will be quoting these statistics. When you really dig into them, it's hard to know that there's a bit of rubberiness, if that's a word, around these numbers, but they're not a bad guide on that. So 30% survive from the first to the second generation broadly. Now, that is probably, we think, slightly higher, to be honest with you, but it's maybe 30-40% on that. Going from second to third generation, it drops. And this is where you're going. If first to second generation is from parents to siblings, second to third is going from siblings to cousin group. And that's often why in family business, people talk about shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. And it is that the crunch one is going from siblings to cousin. And we'll talk about that as we go through on this webinar, because what you want is to set up what we call a glue or an identity, a belonging in that cousin generation. It's easier in the sibling generation because it's one family. But in the cousin generation, you've often got 2, 3, maybe 4 families of cousins that need to be able to work together, make decisions, communicate well, manage conflict, all that sort of thing. And so you really have to have a number of what we call key family governance issues in place to allow that to happen. Get that right, and then you're off, because the third to fourth, the numbers are around that number. Now, if we get in that first to second or second to third, we get the family governance stuff in place, that final statistic goes up enormously on that one. So treat these slightly with a grain of salt, but they're indicative and something to think about. Particularly, the crunch one is that second to third. Get that in place, and your chances are much better. Probably the key message here is you can't just rely on love and good luck, right? You've really got to put things into place. You have the discussions, have the conversations. I know actually a couple of 4th generation family businesses that have really got nothing in place, and they've done it. Now, the problem is they're just damn lucky, frankly. And we know actually for a couple of them that they're really struggling. And it is difficult at this point. So there are things to be done in this space. Now, when we talk about the challenges for family business, and we ask family businesses, and often it is around communication. It's often around how do I work with my siblings, conflict. There's a lot of those challenges in there. The Economist did a brilliant, long, I don't know what they call it, a long form article back in 2015. And it was a worldwide report into family-owned businesses. And their conclusion, and I think I would agree with this, is succession is your biggest challenge. Right. And whether it is getting the next generation ready, whether it is what we call founder syndrome, it's the family being able to have conversations around business, around money, around skills, merit, all those sort of things that often families don't want to talk about. Right? Parents don't want to upset any of their children, but it may be that one of the kids is actually more suited, has the right level of skills to take over the business where the others don't. Now, that takes a lot of honesty and a lot of courage to have those conversations. So succession is a challenge. Get this right, a whole lot of other things fall into place. So this model we developed a long time ago, 8-9 years ago at least. And we were working with a number of family businesses. And this really, literally, I wrote this up in my illegible scrawl on a whiteboard when I was working with a couple of family businesses. The key elements for any successful family business is that ability to have honest conversations, that there is a level of transparency in what is going on. If information is hidden or not shared, then people start getting suspicious. Effectively, if you don't have transparency, you have conspiracy theories. And transparency is one of the ways to just literally, deal with stuff, right? So, for example, we had a family where one of the brothers came to me saying, my sister's getting paid too much. We're a family business. She's getting paid far too much. And she actually didn't know what the sister was getting paid, but he figured it was far too much. Now, actually, that family had an independent outside consultant come in, assess what the salary for that role should be, level of seniority, size of business, blah, blah, blah. And we're able to show that person, the brother's like, well, actually, here's a completely independent finding, and actually it's bang on, right? It's fair, it's market-based, and being able to do that just eliminated the disgruntlement, if you like, from that particular brother. The other one here is fairness, and we are constantly managing what is perceived to be either fair or unfair, and it is a perception, and it's an important perception. In a family, and particularly siblings, there's always the sense of, are they getting more than me? Or, that sort of thing. Not usually worried if they're getting more themselves, but there's a sense of, is it fair? And fairness is a perception, and it's often one to be negotiated. Now, if you look at money going out, we have a fairly standard rule. If money goes to one member of the family, it actually should go to the other members of the family, unless they've done something particularly important or significant in some way or another. So you can see that need to have the honest conversations and the transparency, in order to manage fairness. I know in my own 2 daughters, I thought I was really big on this. And I remember my youngest daughter, when she had her 18th birthday, was clearly a bit grumpy with me. And I went to her and I said, okay, what's going on? And she said, oh, you noticed? I said, yeah, I noticed. And she said, well, Catherine had a better 18th birthday than I did. I'm just going, oh my God, right? And it was just a conversation to have, but, a small, simple little example, but these are the sort of things that if they're not addressed can turn into these huge rows, unnecessarily so. So it's managing honesty, honest conversations, fairness, transparency. And what then starts growing and coming out from these is that issue of trust. And if you have trust in the family, that's your biggest asset, because you can manage conflict better, you can manage the conversations better, you're trusting that they're not coming at you from ill intent, they're saying something because it needs to be said, that sort of thing. So we deal with this all the time, and manage this when we're working with family businesses. There are a number of challenges, and I talk about this in this webinar in a number of different ways. The key thing, and literally I had someone yesterday saying to me, I don't want to let the business get in the way of damaging the relationships. And it's absolutely true. No family business wants the business to damage relationships within the family. Alas, it happens. This is the problem at times. It does happen. And so, but it's really important to keep in mind that particular issue. Transitional succession. And we're going to talk quite a bit about this. And there it's talking about getting the next generation ready. What is the development plan? What is the process? Are they wanting to do this? Is it something that's important to them, or is it not? Now, if no one in the next generation wants the gig, if you like, that's not a problem so much. Actually, we can hire in good professionals, but it's having that conversation. And certainly in my own family business of my family of origin, we had a family business in New Zealand, and no one had the conversations. And really, it should have been my brother who should have taken it over. He was skilled and all that sort of thing, but no one talked, and that business no longer exists. I was back in that town fairly recently, and saw where the building where my parents' business was, and in fact, it's not a building anymore; it's a parking lot, which is a little depressing. But there's no sign of that. That legacy's all gone, and it pulls on the heartstrings a little bit here. And the other part of succession, of course, is for the senior generation or the current generation, that they're comfortable in what they're doing, and there's a lot of conversations here, and that they have confidence in the next generation, and in terms of that they're going to take it on. And in fact, a lot of what we do is actually manage conversations between the next generation and the senior generation. The senior generation, they've often built this thing up. They've been running it for a long time. They do struggle with what we call founder syndrome. I'll talk about that in a minute here. But it is very important that they don't feel like they're just being put out to pasture. We have a blog on that, and it came from a guy in his 70s who, in a workshop, was saying, "Don't you put me out to pasture." And he's right. He's this brilliant guy, and he's not going to sit back and doesn't want to just sit back and do things. He wants to do things he loves doing. He wants next generation to do all the stuff he doesn't like. So there's the conversations that actually need to happen. And finally, getting all these agreements and putting them in writing. You can have the agreements and don't write them down, and they're not worth it, right? Because you're relying on people's memories, and it's just a complete schmozzle. We have a couple of situations at the moment where you talk to different family members, and one's saying black, one's saying white, effectively, but they were all in the same room 10 years ago making the decisions. So it's got to be written down, and it's got to be agreed to, and there's a process that we use in this. So when you're developing a succession plan, often people think of succession in two parts. It's not. It's in three. First one is leadership. Who's going to take over the gig and run it? Directorship. Who's going to be on the board? And then, of course, ownership. And often directorship gets left out. We've seen some interesting material around recently where they just talk about leadership and ownership. Actually, directorship is very important. And that comes down to questions of the board and so on. The directors are extraordinarily important and responsible on this business. So we'll talk about this as we go through here. So just as a summary, if you're a family business, these are really important things to know. Love and money are a potent brew. You are combining these two really important areas of your life. There's a big difference between the sibling group and a cousin group, going from second to third, as I was talking about before, and we need to manage that and work on that. Never underestimate the emotional connection that family members have with the business. They often identify. They've often been involved as youngsters. Often the conversation around the dinner table is all around the business. And so there is a huge emotional connection. We work with a number of very large farming families, and farms are even more emotionally connected because it's home as well as the business. And you have to manage this. You have to be very sensitive to these connections because they're there. It is really important that whoever's going to take over the business in terms of from a leadership perspective and succession, it's based on merit. Right? This whole idea that it has to be the oldest or the oldest son or whatever, right, is ridiculous. You have to have these things based on who's got the skills, the aptitude, and the knowledge. And that, again, takes honest conversations. We often finding that, some families, you've got the boys who've often been involved in the business in a very practical way, but the business is now such that in one case, the daughter, who's an accountant, is much more likely to and much more suitable to run the business because it's not to do with practical day-to-day things. It's actually business nous, it's managing finance, it's managing contracts. And the daughter, who was the youngest, actually was the absolute most suitable to run that. So, these are important discussions to have. You need clear written family documentation. And this is things like particularly a family charter. There may be important documentation around the board, the constitution, those sorts of things. I'll talk about that a little bit later here. The reality is there's always some level of conflict in a family. There's no rule that says siblings have to get on with one another, or that cousins have to get on with one another. There is some conflict. The key thing is managing it and finding ways to resolve it or not let it really start getting very destructive, because it can. And so there are things that you can put in place, a conflict strategy and process that everyone agrees to, that sort of thing. Or even if you don't like each other, it's still being able to have conversations around the business, and it's separating out, the family hat that I'm where it's like, I really don't like my sister or my brother, to my business hat. It's like, okay, we are business owners, or we are directors, or we are co-leading this business. What needs to be done? And easy to say, not that easy to do, but very important to think, which hat am I wearing in this particular conversation? And as I said earlier, far too many families break the Christmas dinner rule, and it's important that when there are conflicts, they are managed in a way that actually the family can sit down and can celebrate in whatever way they celebrate. The end of the year, or a particular significant occasion, or something like that. It could be a birthday or something like that. That's important, and we work on that. So if you're going to build a family legacy, 5 areas for you to be thinking about. So get very clear on the rules of ownership, directorship, and leadership. And what are they? And that's part of a family charter that we develop with people. And we go through each of those separately in terms of what are the rules around if you're going to own this thing, how do you protect the assets, who's going to be a director, what are the qualifications to be a director, and of course, what are the qualifications to lead the business or have a senior role in the business. And this is all part of getting the next generation ready. It could be introducing them to key relationships. It could be getting them to sit in and observe key meetings, board meetings, senior management meetings. It could be getting them to travel around the business and learn all the different areas, from how to sweep the floor properly in one corner to how to negotiate really important business deals. So, getting the next generation and having a plan for that so that everybody knows what the deal is. The focus is on merit. As we said, people have to earn this. They have to be, and we sometimes will set up independent groups to assess, do these people have the skills to run this? Getting the senior generation comfortable. The big misconception with succession is that it is date stamped. All right. On this particular date, the next generation will come in, and on that particular date, the senior generation will go away, put on fluffy slippers, and watch Netflix for the rest of their lives. It's complete rubbish. It's a process. It might take years. The senior generation, our classic story, of course, and we've said this many times, is when we met a 100-year-old who was working 2 days a week in the business. He was no longer he didn't own the business anymore. He was no longer a director. He just came in 2 days a week, and that was his thing. Right? We can name a couple of 90-year-olds who have offices in the family business. They probably come in once a week. They say hi to the staff. They say hello, all that sort of thing. That's what they want. Right? So it's finding what is the role. Some of them, senior generation, going, actually, I'm out of here. Great, love it, looking forward to getting my dividend, and thank you very much. I'm going to hitch the caravan up to the back of the car. I'm going to go sailing, which would be my thing, whatever it is. So it's and again, this is a conversation and a negotiation, and aligned what we call family governance with business governance, and because you're a family business, you have to have both. If you're just a normal SME, it's just focusing on the business governance, the shareholders, the board, the management, and all the various documentations required with that. But because you're a family business, you have to have this family governance aligned with the business governance. You're not just an SME. And here's our main diagram that talks about this. On business governance, you have the shareholders, the board, the executive, and then it could be different types of board. Are you an advisory? Do you have an advisory board? Do you have a board of directors? Now, pros and cons for each of those, and we can talk to you, about that. But matching with that is this family governance, the family charter with the 40-year vision, or viewing really, the family council, who is on the family council. This is a core group of family people. I'll talk about that shortly. And then the family forum, which is a larger group of the family, and very important in creating that glue that we talked about earlier. Succession plan is usually part of the family charter. Wills need to align. There's obviously a level of estate planning that's required. And what's the next generation plan or development plan, which is all coming under this. Now, in many ways, the family council is aligned with the board, and there should often be a very, important line or link between those two. They do very different things, and it's very important that you manage what we call shadow directorships and that sort of thing. We've got a couple of blogs on this one. But effectively, the family council talks about direction and the board makes decisions. And it's a very, very important distinction. Have a look at our blog online on that one, because it is important. So some of the challenges, and there are, right? We're not saying this is a simple thing. Founders syndrome. Getting the next generation ready. Are they willing? Do they want to? Have they got the skills? That sort of thing. And it's a tricky one at times, particularly for parents who may have to say to one of their children, actually, you're not qualified yet, or you're not ready. And that's a tough one. That's a very, very tough conversation to have. And balancing fairness. How do you balance fairness around fairness of opportunities, money, all of that sort of thing that comes along here. So founder syndrome, let's have a look at this. So founder syndrome comes from, and we're being slightly, what's the word? Possibly rude. Yeah, you'll see what I mean. It comes in three broad ways. So founders are extraordinary. They start a business. They have worked their guts out. They have taken risks. They have worked day and night. They've missed, lots of family engagements because they're working, they're starting this thing, they're building it up, right? And the problem or the challenge is they often believe that they're the only ones who can do their job. They have risked it all to get this thing happening. Often, they're control freaks, and they've been so successful because they are control freaks, which leads to them thinking they're the only one that can do their job. The other problem is that if they didn't come to work, because they've been so involved in the business, they don't have any other outside of work interests, and so they've got nothing to do. And the big fear is, I wake up in the morning, and if I don't come to work, what on earth do I do? What's my reason for getting up? And this is a really key conversation to have, because they still have a feeling no one else can do their job. Now, we have a lot of conversations between the next generation and the current generation or the senior generation on this, and it's really important. And it's because we're ultimately respectful of the senior generation. They're the ones that started this. They have to be comfortable with where we go. If they want to pass this business on, if they want to build that legacy, they have to find space for the next generation to come in. And that is at times quite a tough conversation to have. And it means facing their own mortality and trusting in fact that the next generation is going to be able to do it, right? And not just blow what they've spent 40 years building. The reality is there's actually lots of positives that come out of these conversations. It's just having those conversations that are really important. So getting ready for the next generation or getting the next generation ready, they're both important here, all right? So as I've said, they have to have the skills, the knowledge, the aptitude. They just can't get a gig, particularly at a senior level, because they're family. Right? It just does not work. And this is very much why we often see shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. You need to have really clear expectations, written down expectations for what it means to work in the business and be involved in the business, how they behave. There's sort of this sense at times where you get the next generation coming in and all they seem to be interested in is driving fast cars and looking really flash. It's actually not how you run a business. There's a lot of hard grind. There's a lot of things to learn. You do know how to better read a spreadsheet. You sometimes are up at night, dealing with things. So being really clear, what are the expectations? And at the same time, having clear family agreements in place. That's really the family charter. And that's managing the fairness side of things, as well as the business side. So shareholders agreements, wills, other documents, so that are aligned with the family expectations and the family charter. So there's a number of things that you're juggling here. Now, in reality, it's not that difficult, but it does take some work. It means that you've just got to really sit down and think these things through. And as long as you don't have to rush it, it happens. So this family I mentioned earlier, where we had the 16 of them in the room, we met 4 or 5 times for a day at a time every month, and it was great, right? And we got through it, and they're now about to celebrate the formal signing of this. It's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Family governance. So this is that left-hand side of that diagram that I put up earlier, right? So your family charter or constitution, family council, and family forum. And let me go through these in some detail here. So the family charter. And the family charter is the place where you're writing all the stuff down. So you're writing down your rules of the family council, the rules of the family forum. You're talking about how the family deals with money. There could be things like, when there are dividends coming, what's the dividend policy? It's got the succession plan in there. It's got the expectations in there. So it's a lot of information. They're usually 30 pages or so. Right? So it's written by the family over time and truly owned by the family. So what you don't want is mum and dad to go and work with somebody and write a family charter and then present that back to the family. You just don't get the ownership. We've had 14, 15-year-olds in some of these meetings, and they've loved it because they are part of the discussions, right? And they get to talk about the ideas and the agreements and that sort of thing. So people feel like it's owned, and it really works. Very powerful. Right? It gains agreement from the family in terms of, what are we doing long term? Right? Because we literally ask the question, who is family and what's your vision? What is the long-term vision here, both for the business and the family? And what are some of the rules and principles that are really important? And those are, seemingly simple questions, but they're not. They can be quite challenging, and they need time to be thinking around, and important stuff. It provides guidelines for the future generations. And so if we can get the rules set up for the next round of succession, then the ones after that should actually be fairly straightforward. You've got some really core principles in place, so it works long term. Absolutely brings the family closer together. We see families, resolve difficulties. They've resolved conflicts that have often been lingering, and they realize that actually they're part of something really pretty amazing. And it's these agreed rules, bedrock agreements, right? And I'm about to sneeze. I do apologize if I do. That actually, because everybody's been involved with, people are agreed to follow. And that's the really good thing, because they're not legally binding documents. Shareholders agreement is, but family charters by and large aren't legally binding, but they're emotionally binding. And so if everybody has had a part in this, then it's like they're much more likely to adhere to it. That's what you want. And it gets rid of a lot of this, what we call family destroying conflict. And in some ways, I talk about our work is actually preventing future conflict. If I had to say, what do? We prevent future conflict, really, via setting up family charters, via looking at really good succession plans, all that sort of thing, where our job is to prevent future family conflict. That's basically what we do. The process is really important here. Right. The process allows the family to have conversations, often that everybody has wanted to have, but has never got around to it. All right. So we actually have a formal setting. We sit and we talk about the important things. Equally, it's conversations and issues are raised that need to be raised, but the people are going, I don't know whether I want to get into that conversation, right? But they're important. And so we find a safe way, I don't like that word, but an appropriate way perhaps, for a family to have these conversations and talk about the things. It identifies or allows family members to identify opportunities, both in the family and in the business or even in the investments, just never been seen before, right? It's brilliant. It really works well. And it sorts out this conflict stuff, these disagreements. Family members are often holding on to conflicts for a decade, 2 decades, some cases 3 decades, right? This is crazy. It drives everybody bonkers. And we actually find a way to start resolving those, or at least taking the sting out of them so much. And it's a living document. It's one that needs to be reviewed. We generally recommend every 5 or 10 years, review it. Things do change. There might be stuff that we didn't predict that needs to be sorted out. And so it becomes a living document that in the family council gets reviewed and sorted out. So let me talk about family council, family forum. Key difference is family council is really what you would call the close core family. Now, we often talk about it's mum and dad and the kids. But some families want the in-laws to be involved, and they have certain rules about, you might need to be married, or you might need to be married for a certain period of time, or whatever it is. Some families don't want in-laws involved at all. And that's where the family forum is. So if the family council is, if you like, mum, dad, and the kids, the family forum is mum, dad, kids, in-laws, grandchildren, the whole lot. All right, the neighbor's dog, if you like. And they're both very important. And it's up to each family and their particular culture to decide who is in what. There is a lot of contention around in-laws, and I haven't got time to talk through that in huge detail at the moment, but they are really important. The reality is there will not be a next generation without the in-laws, and they often see things and know things that the rest of the family don't see. They're incredibly important here, and they need to be dealt with and managed respectfully. And it is different. Each family is slightly different here, but this family council is dealing with really core, important family matters and financial matters. The family forum is a meeting usually about once a year where everybody gets together. It's, if you like, a gathering of the clan, and it starts building that glue. It reignites the relationships. Cousins get to meet cousins again. And it talks about what it means to be part of this family and part of this business. Both very, very important. So they're both a regular meeting. Usually it's 2 family council meetings a year, sometimes more, and sometimes you get extraordinary meetings caught up. At one level or another, you have to involve the in-laws in some way or another here. It builds family culture and legacy, and that's the really key thing here. And they have a range of responsibilities, and it's linking family and business and what's going on. So let me go into a little bit of detail here. Family council. And this comes from one of our programs that we work on. We'll often get updates from the board. Remember, we were saying family council provides direction, the board provides or makes decisions. Important distinction. And I'd urge you to have a look at our blog on this one. They're often looking at family wealth management and investment decisions. So a lot of family businesses have various other investments. So the family council may be the one that's managing that. In really big family businesses, we'll often set up an investment council. Again, attended by people who are qualified and knowledgeable in that area. Family council is very much around aligning the family with the business, particularly around values, and is it working in the way that is aligned with the family's values here, and obviously their long-term vision of things. It often will help around education, and it depends. And education is often a really important value for a lot of family businesses. Trying to work out how to do it is a bit of a nightmare. We have a couple of really, what we think actually quite successful ways of approaching this, because it's really an issue of fairness in many ways. But it's one thing that family council can really do that supports next generation in terms of helping them around, whether it's tertiary education or primary education or secondary education. We have a number of solutions around this one. If someone has particular special needs, health issues, if someone has suddenly got really ill or something has happened, and it does happen every so often, hopefully not that often, but we've got a couple of cases where there's been some really very, very tragic things have happened, and the family council is really able to come together and really help support that family member. It's looking at the development opportunities for the next generation. whether they're coming into the business or whether they are actually developing a business of their own. And this is this entrepreneurial thing. And so we often have a innovation and entrepreneurial section in the family charter, which talks about, well, if you've got a business idea, come and talk to the family council, present your case and let's see. And it's a way that helps the overall family and also the individual. And it's an amazing thing. It's just brilliant on that. Many families are into philanthropy, and the family council is often a key guide and driver of that. And also engaging with the younger members of the next generation. So they learn values, history, culture, and of course, what's the succession of the family council? Who's going to take over and become part of that over the next 10, 20, 30 years? And that's very important. So if we start doing a bit of a summary here, for succession to be successful, got to say that one carefully, you need very high levels of transparency. You want to start early. The earlier, the better. We unfortunately have worked with a family in Australia where if we got involved 10 or 15 years earlier, they would not be in this particularly awful situation that they're in. And frankly, the earlier you start, the better and the cheaper and easier it is. It's start thinking about this. And for some reason, people don't like talking about this whole idea of succession. We've been involved in research in New Zealand with MB and that sort of thing, asking why are people so worried about talking about succession? And to be honest, I don't really know. I've got a couple of ideas, but the earlier you can do it, the better. It does require the family to have actually important conversations and topics. And sometimes these are a bit awkward. Actually, they're not as awkward as you think they are. And often they're easier than we think they actually are when you get to them. And that's, again, as part of what we bring, because we find ways for the family to address the issues without the big explosions or the people being hurt and that sort of thing, which is the fear, right? Which is often prevents these conversations. I don't want to hurt my children. I don't want to insult them or whatever. And usually the fear of that is actually far worse than the actual reality. And finally, it's got to be fair, and it's got to be seen to be fair. So it's less to do with the money. And often, accountants will say, well, okay, that money, or you've earned this because you've done this in the business or whatever it is. It usually has nothing to do with money. It often has to do with recognition, how they feel about it, relationships within the family, that sort of thing. And that's where you need some real expertise to be able to negotiate this and find a way through, because it is important. And if it's not fair, that festers, and that can really lead to some awful blow-ups. You have to be able to manage the emotional as well as the financial. All right, the finances are fine. And you can get people in who can deal with that and look at that. It's managing the emotions on it for everybody, all right? And that's the key, right? And actually, we are a family-first organization. So if we don't have the family, then we don't have a family business. So actually, we need to make sure the family is aligned and the business will fall into place, right? And that doesn't mean you don't have good financial controls and so on all in place. But if the family isn't working, the business won't either. And we may have to do, and so let's focus on the family, get that sorted out. The rest falls into place. But it is, I'm not dismissing the importance of financials by any stretch. We work with some brilliant financial advisors, and it is important. All right. I think that is the end. Thank you so much, for watching. I hope this has been informative and useful. Please get in touch, Philip at familybusinesscentral.com or via the website, familybusinesscentral.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what you're doing in the family business, what's happening, what's working, that sort of thing. So I hope this has been useful, and have a wonderful day. Okay, bye for now.